Welcome to Exhuming the Truth, a podcast dedicated to cold cases, missing persons, systemic injustices, and the art of forensic science that seeks answers when silence remains. My name is Asha, and I am a forensic scientist and a criminologist, and in each episode, we examine the evidence, the systems, and the human stories often left behind. This isn't just about true crime. It's about truth, it's about accountability, and it's about giving a voice to those who deserve to be heard. Thank you for being here, and let's jump right in. Hi guys, this second episode for Luke Gilbert today has been such a long time coming. The family have been so patient with me, but I have put in a lot of work into this. Now, if you obviously, I assume you have listened to part one, and that's why you're here today. So part one was quite extensive. It was nearly an hour. And yeah, I did put a lot of work into that, as I have with this. So I'm really keen to share this with you and to get everybody to hear it. First, I'm going to do a little bit of a housekeeping. I won't bore you too much, and then we can jump right in. There's just a couple of things that I want to touch on, and then we'll move straight into today's episode. First of all, I feel it necessary in the work that I do to acknowledge the absolute tragedy that unfolded in Mosman Park in Perth recently. So that is involving the death of a family, of the entire family, both parents, both sons. I believe it was 2 dogs and 1 cat, but I'm unsure. But this has been declared as a murder-suicide. Now, I did make a post about this, and I stand by everything I said there. This is obviously an unfathomably sad situation, and it is a tragedy, full stop. It's not something that I want to sensationalize, but I feel it needs to be spoken on right now, because there's a lot of nasty comments on the internet around this, and it's something that I think people need to be educated on, and I need to touch on that vocally as well as I did on the internet, just with words, I guess. But murder in a murder-suicide is not independent. These two things have to exist together. You can't separate or isolate them in a murder-suicide. This is super important terminology, and it is also the result of a very deep systemic failure. And today's episode obviously has further very deep systemic failures, so I think it was the perfect time to touch on this really quickly. And when I'm talking about systemic failures for this family, I'm talking about the healthcare, justice system, social support systems, all of these things that come together and combine that often leave people without the intervention that they need and deserve long before they reach a point like this, a crisis point. And this is just one of those moments that many of us have the privilege of not understanding, and that really matters. Our business is all about compassion for the victims and victim survivors. And while we are compassionate, it doesn't mean justification, but it is about education at the end of the day. We can't sit here and, preach more hate to this family that we obviously, again, have the privilege of not relating to. We must acknowledge the systemic failure, and it's not going to erase the accountability. And this is obviously an incredibly distressing and sad thing that could have happened. But both of these things can exist at the same time, and that's very important. And it's also important that we can hold particular space for that complexity without causing further harm, especially to victims, families, people with disabilities like myself, vulnerable people of the community. And a lot of the time, the people I've just listed are the ones who are getting caught in the fallout of these conversations. So I just really wanted to chat about that. And then really quickly, I also wanted to briefly touch on a development in New South Wales where there's actually legislation that's being introduced to end the use of the, and I quote, good character references in sentencing. This is just something that heaps of victim advocates have been calling for, particularly in serious crimes where, somebody's been convicted and then they'll be able to have family or friends talk about a good character reference for them. And historically, those character references have actually been used to minimise the harm and shift sympathy a little bit and create a bit of an unequal outcome in the courtroom, and it's actually designed to lessen their sentence. So that's an important one that's going through. Anyway, all of this completely sits at the background of tonight's episode because Luke Gilbert's story, like so many others, is not just about one moment. It's not about one decision, and it's not about one particular headline. It's actually about a system that continues to fail families seeking truth. It has done that to the Gilbert family. It does every single day. The transparency and accountability, there's basically none. And it's about conflicts of interest, even unanswered questions, and of course the ongoing toll that all of these collectively, they have an impact on the injustices long after, the media drop a story. And this is not a story, this is somebody's life. This is a family's life that they are being forced into now, and it's very important. Now, this episode is obviously not about outrage for the sake of it. It's about clarity in the outrage. It's about the evidence, and it's about continuing to tell this story loudly and in full, even when it's uncomfortable. There are going to be topics that are uncomfortable, of course. You know where the disclaimer is by now. Thank you for being here. Please listen with care. Look after yourself. Make sure you listen with nuance. And let's get into it, part 2. Today's episode is the second part of our examination into the tragic and premature death of Luke Gilbert, who was fatally shot by the Queensland Police in Airlie Beach on the 1st of October of 2022. Now, this episode exists for one reason, because despite a coronial finding having been handed down to the family, the foundational evidence required to properly assess this death was never fully examined. It was never independently tested, and in more than one case here, information was never even disclosed at all. This episode is about facts. You are going to be listening to facts about honesty. You're going to be listening to the process and learning a little bit about forensic integrity and whether the system's designed to investigate deaths like Luke's, deaths involving those who actually vowed to protect us, the police, actually function or functioned as they are legally required to. Everything discussed today is, of course, drawn from the raw material raised by Luke's family, from the coronial record, and from forensic and procedural standards that apply to deaths in custody and police shootings. And where allegations are made today, I'm going to clearly say so, and where evidence is missing, I will explain why that absence matters and what effect that actually has on this entire situation. Part 1, the overarching injustice. At the time of his death, Luke Gilbert was not committing a crime. The family of Luke believe that the coronial findings into his death are factually inaccurate, procedurally unfair, and reliant on incomplete, altered, or withheld evidence. And I agree with that family 100%. They further then allege that multiple institutions, including the Queensland Police, Ethical Standards Command, and the Crime and Corruption Commission, the coronial officer and the legal representatives all failed in their statutory duties. This is another thing that I have to agree with, and while this might seem like a very long list, some might speculate and say too long. The sheer number of damaging events in this tragic recount is a twisted knife at every single roadblock, and it is almost too hard to even comprehend that one of these injustices have even occurred, let alone several that we are now piling up on top of each other. We talk about alleged actions here to obviously safeguard everyone involved, but what is being alleged is not a single error. It's a systemic failure through omission. And in forensic investigations, omissions are not neutral. They shape outcomes just as decisively as actions. Part 2, the single biggest red flag, missing and altered CCTV. No, I did not fumble. If there is one issue that undermines every and any conclusion in this case, it is the CCTV evidence, or more accurately, the absence and alteration of it. Let's have a look into this further though, because I want to go deep into this part, missing CCTV, because this is Luke's final moments. Now, according to numerous, let's underline that, according to numerous recounts, CCTV footage showing Luke's final moments and police movements leading up to the shooting has never been provided. Witnesses have stated that they saw the footage that tracked Luke's movements through the precinct and showed police presence prior to the fatal encounter. That footage has also never been disclosed to the family, let alone tested and presented at the inquest. This is very, very vital evidence. Now, along with this, there are also allegations that police have actually got the CCTV footage and made a request for that footage to be deleted. Now, those allegations were also never investigated or even brought up. Now, when we're talking about edited footage and missing timestamps, don't be silly, you're thinking. Well, the Whitsunday Regional Council CCTV systems always include timestamps. So when keeping that in mind and comparing that standard with what was presented to the Gilbert family, the footage they received had the timestamps removed in their entirety, and the provided footage appeared to have been edited, and it can't actually, be synchronized with the police body-worn camera time codes, which is a very, very big error. When we look at this from a digital forensic standpoint, this is absolutely catastrophic. Now, without the original files, intact metadata and timestamps and all together as one, you actually can't establish a reliable timeline. We need the original files, and obviously those will have their codes and it will have timestamps, and you can align them with the police body-worn footage, and this is how they generally will come up with the reliable and timeline that they have real sturdy evidence and confidence in. Now, without these, you just can't confirm whether Luke was followed or monitored, and you can't properly assess whether lethal force was necessary, or, there's no proportion in any capacity whatsoever. Now, the original CCTV files listed on the index to the brief were never provided. Now, these were numerous requested documents, so it wasn't just like hey, can we have access to this? It was again and again and again. And this was to the council, the police, the ethical standards, the CCC, the coroner, the information commissioner, and you guessed it, they were all refused. And on many of those occasions of request, the basis for their argument was that Luke was not the subject of the investigation, despite providing footage that tracks Luke's movements. So go figure. Now, from an investigative standpoint here, that position is obviously untenable, and without the original footage, like I said, every downstream finding is essentially compromised because we're working with something someone has made up along the line. We're not aligning things properly how it should be done with all of the digital evidence, and there's a hell of a lot of digital evidence here, particularly around supporting that timeline. So it's a bit odd that they wouldn't want to secure that and be like, yeah, here's everything, chuck it all together, match it up with our body-worn cameras, the times, the actions, and what have you. It's just odd to me that they don't want to do that to help themselves. Part 3, forensic red flags and mismanagement. Let's talk ballistics. Now, obviously, when I'm referring to ballistics, I am talking about the weapon that is a gun and the bullets that come from the weapon of a gun. Now, the public accounts on the ballistics vary quite a lot on how many shots were fired. The critical part about this is when there's no complete ballistic reconstruction, we can't actually compare anything. Again, then we have no evidence there. We have not got a ballistic reconstruction, which is part of the forensic work. And that means that there's no full analysis on the trajectory. So essentially, I'm assuming you know what that means. If you don't, just what way, where a person was shooting from and where that bullet went, how far it went, things like that. No confirmed impact points, no comprehensive projectile recovery, and no verified sequence of shots. Also, again, this is what bullet came from what gun, where did it end up, and what have you. And why is all of this important if Luke was shot, not with all bullets, but only some, you're probably thinking. Now, without it, investigators can't actually determine who fired which shot and in what order the shots were fired and at what distance the shots were fired and under what conditions the shots were fired. And essentially all of these things together, they come together and hold hands to reconstruct this really obviously incredibly crucial part of this very brief event. This was a matter of seconds, you guys. And again, we're now on a downfall from not having the original CCTV to match up with the body-worn footage to then have a reliable ballistic comprehensive analysis here. Now, obviously, when there is a shooting and somebody is killed with a gun, ballistics is just not optional. It's not optional to do a ballistics analysis if somebody's been shot and killed, particularly in police shootings. It's actually foundational, and the absence of this work leaves critical questions unanswered. Not only this, I say it to everybody that I talk to this case about, and I feel like I'm a broken record when I say it, but it's never going to not blow my mind. If you've read the book, you know exactly how I feel, but it is not just one massive, just ridiculous injustice here. It's again and again and again. And this is why we could literally talk about Luke and the Gilbert family's case every single week, and you would walk away shocked and disheartened by our country. And right now, I'm about to jump into another miscarriage here about the knife. Even if it was just this one thing, they failed him. The knife misclassification. He was carrying a Milwaukee folding utility penknife at the time of his death. These are kind of similar to a pocket knife, but they're used for work. My fiance has one. Most men that are tradies, I know, have one. Now he had this attached to his belt for the entire day. And this item was classified as a Category M prohibited weapon. Guys, this is actually factually incorrect. This is incorrect. And it's been seen in a court of law, in a coronial inquest. And that is incorrect. Literally, you can look it up yourself. It is not that hard to understand. They're very different. Does not fall under a Category M weapon. So this is, like I said, commercially available. You can go to Bunnings. It's lawfully sold in Australia, and it's not inherently illegal to possess a working penknife. Now, agencies were actually informed of this error, so they were told. They were like, hey, we know, for example, human error, not this many, but say it was one. This happened. It's not a Category M weapon. Let the authorities know. And they literally left the misclassification in there in all of the official paperwork. And again, this is important because weapon characterization shapes perceived threat. It kind of makes it look like Luke was doing the wrong thing and he was cruising around with a weapon looking to harm someone, which is not the case at all. It's just wild to me. And this misclassification, it artificially inflates the danger and kind of justifies. This is why I feel, to my core, this is why they have kept this misclassification, because it helps them to feel like they're justifying the force that they used, that they did not need to use, but that they did use. Now, this one gets me every time. The autopsy being conducted without consent. So the family have made known that the consent for a full autopsy was fraudulently recorded on a Form 1. I'm always lost for words when I get to this section. This actually constitutes a criminal offence. It's a breach of human rights. It's a violation of forensic ethics. It's unreal. And despite these facts, no agency, none, not just the police, all the ones we've spoken about, none of them took action. And the coroner didn't even address this issue in the findings, which is absolutely absurd. And from a forensic perspective, any evidence obtained following an unlawful autopsy is tainted. That's it. Now, again, there's more. There's withheld forensic evidence relating to officer misconduct. We touched on this briefly last time, but a police officer that was unrelated to the shooting, he was actually later convicted of improperly accessing Luke's police records and, disclosing information that he had found there to third parties. Now, this evidence was also withheld from the inquest. So that's a conflict of interest, is it not? The forensic implications here, again, including potential witness contamination, were never examined. You guessed it. Part 4, and what everybody likes to call the controversial section, police conduct questions. This is where our conflict of interest part 2 seeps in. Claims of no prior contact. So police stated that they had never interacted with Luke prior to the shooting. But remember how we spoke a little bit about digital evidence and video evidence and CCTV? Because there is video evidence that exists that allegedly shows the officers involved watching, monitoring, and even following Luke throughout that evening. 2 officers central to the timeline were actually never even questioned at the inquest. I have actually nothing to say about that. Why not? Why? Who made this call? What the hell? Potential conflict of interest, the main one that was ignored. We had, of course, a sworn statement that alleged that one officer had prior personal contact with Luke's partner. Now, he was a rejected romantic interest, and there was, evidence to suggest that he had been observing Luke and his partner together earlier that day, that he was involved in the shooting of Luke. And this obviously raises conflict of interest, multiple concerns. It was never investigated. And in any other investigative context, this would be a mandatory line of inquiry. But for some reason, this case just, falls in the gutter for literally everything and anything. Witnesses approached, actually, before the shooting, and some witnesses alleged that police approached individuals in the area before the fatal encounter. Just have a think about that. Why would police be approaching individuals in the area before committing that crime? If that's a true statement, then that actually contradicts claims of a spontaneous interaction. And the only ones saying that the interaction was spontaneous are those officers who spoke at the inquest. So, yeah, that speaks for itself. Part 5, procedural failures and systemic collusion. So we had these witness statements that contradicted video evidence, and these statements were actually accepted without a cross-examination. So just to briefly explain, if you have somebody up on the stand, that means they're giving evidence, and they will have an evidence in chief, which means they're basically free to talk, and if they're getting asked any questions, they're to help them, I guess. And then you have cross-examination, and that's usually where the other side comes in and cross-examines you and kind of pulls you up on discrepancies and things like that. So that never happened. Some witnesses actually had personal links to the officers involved, and that also violates basic evidentiary hierarchy. So the experts that were included in this inquest, right, were provided with the edited video footage, I should say, and limited documentation. So typically that's obviously not standard. You're meant to have everything and anything and what time you went to the toilet, but they've just been given incomplete things and edited things, and they were not provided the full CCTV either, and complete medical records weren't provided, just, bits and pieces chopped up how they wanted it, and there was no complete ballistic evaluation. So the experts are actually only legally allowed to speak about their opinion on what they're given. They can't talk about things they weren't given, and incomplete inputs produce unreliable conclusions. I think that's a very fair thing to say. There are a lot of transcript and audio issues among all of the other issues, and segments of that inquest audio and transcripts are allegedly missing or altered, and there was no challenge made about this at all. No one said anything or did anything about this. Now, when we're talking about the CCC, the Crime and Corruption Commission, they did a review and they did it in 4 days. Pardon me, they did it in 4 days. And when they did this, after 4 days, 4 short days, what they produced contained factual errors. And when the family actually tried to say, hey, this is actually incorrect, and, I can show you how that is correct and things like that, they were ignored. Are all of these people best friends? I don't understand. Now, of course, we also have, that we touched on briefly last time, the Senior Police Union commentary immediately after the shooting, which contained false statements. And we spoke, I am sure I read out all of the false statements of Ian Levers, and these statements that basically shaped the public perception before any investigation occurred. I can't even tell you how many people I've had listen to our first episode for Luke and go on to the Justice for Luke page that's run by Nicola and Darren, Luke's parents, and say, I actually saw this or heard about it in the news and I thought, he was waving a knife around trying to get the police, and so they had to shoot him out of safety. People actually didn't know. So they've just heard what Ian Levers has said and painted their picture on that. Because why do they need to do more research? They've got an officer here on the TV who's given them the full picture, because why would he not? Why would he not tell you the truth? I'm going to go sideways just for a minute before I go into part 6 about human rights implications. That's only a short segment, but just while I go sideways, I had a great chat with a gentleman today, and he has a legal background, but he works in self-representation. Very, very intelligent man. And we spoke a bit about systemic injustices, and that was the basis of our conversation and how we could help each other out with the case injustices that we have. And we kind of came to the conclusion together, just in conversation about his own experiences and my own experiences, that we're kind of, before considering our own human lived experience, we think, why can't people see this? Why can't they see what's happening or how unfair this is? And then we came to the conclusion together that we generally don't consider these things until it's us, until it's our family, and, until it happens to you or your parents or your child. You just don't see these failures. And if you can't go to these people for help, who the hell are you going to go to? And it's something that, a lot of people want to push on other people and things like that. But unfortunately, it's a situation where you just have to learn yourself when you get into a situation that you unfortunately get let down. And then you start to click on and say, okay, so this is how it's working, and this is how people are getting let down, and this is what systemic injustice is. Of course, it's not in every single decision, but it's in far, far, far too many. And this case is everything in, if we're relating stories to what I just said, this is everything. Luke Gilbert, this is an incredibly enormous injustice, and it's embarrassing to me, that this is our system that has done this and that have done all of these things that I'm talking to you about, and that are I can't help but put myself in their shoes and think about waking up every day to go through this every day. I couldn't imagine. It's something I encourage you to do, because again, if it hasn't been you, I'm glad. If it has been you, I'm so sorry. But this is half of the battle, is getting it out there and getting people to listen and just be like, take a chance on me and this, and please listen to me. Please help me. And that's what this is. And we are here for exactly that, for all of the families that we represent, and especially the Gilbert family. So let's get into part 6, human rights implications. So, allegedly, there's breaches in human rights, okay? And this includes the denial of procedural fairness. It includes withholding evidence. It includes altered forensic material, forged consent. These are all things that I've spoken to you about, but this is a bit more formal, the way that I'm reading it to you. There's the failure to investigate bias and misleading public communication. Now, none of these, like as they stand alone, none of these are minor issues. They strike at the heart of public trust. And can you sit for a moment and even dare to imagine losing your child and then facing not just one, but all of these injustices? Part 7, I have literally just labelled this, why this case matters. This case matters because this is a person, and we don't wake up and one day, get to choose our path for that day. We've got no control over external factors. And unfortunately here, it's been painted the contrary when Ian Levers got up and spoke and painted this picture of Luke to be, out there to harm. And that is completely false. This case matters because missing CCTV alone invalidates the findings. Ballistic inconsistencies were never resolved. A false weapon narrative distorted the threat assessment. Potential motive was ignored. Forensic evidence was mishandled. Oversight bodies failed. Police investigated police. That's the big one. And that's not justice. This is institutional self-protection. And something, again, that you might think, this is a little bit controversial, this last topic. But again, it's not. Nothing here is meant to be controversial. This is life. This is something that people are dealing with, that no one should be dealing with. And there's so much damage being done here in this case by Ian Levers of Queensland Police, and the way he spoke and all of the false things that he said right after this shooting, it really damaged the Gilbert family and Luke Gilbert's name. And I don't know if you know, but towards the end of last year, he actually passed by suicide. And that came as really heavy hitting news for the Gilbert family, not because they were sad for this man to have passed. Of course, it was sad for his family, but because now the Gilbert family are never going to get accountability from him. They're never going to get it from him. Can you imagine living with that and knowing that you're never going to get accountability for your son's life? It's not controversy. It just is what it is. And the issue here is, in plain terms, that anyone in this country can become Luke. So is that not scary to everybody else? This case isn't closed. It might have had a coronial inquest. This isn't closed until until there's any resolve. There's no resolve here at all. And until the missing evidence is produced and independently examined, it always will be unresolved. Where's the accountability going to come from? Now, I've done a bit of a forensic timeline that I want to talk about. It's not super long, but it is super important, and it's about what we know and what's missing and why it matters. And the purpose, I guess, of this timeline is to visually, or audibly in this case, demonstrate to you how Luke's final movements and the police actions and, of course, the post-incident investigation can't be reliably reconstructed due to all of this missing, altered or withheld evidence. And it just undermines the integrity of the entire coronial inquest and, in my opinion, the integrity of the coronial findings. So phase 1 is typically the prior context. So for this situation, I've called it before the shooting, and the status of this is incomplete evidence. Now, earlier in the evening, Early Beach precinct is the area we're talking about. Luke is present in this precinct. This is a nightlife area. Now, multiple venues confirm CCTV coverage of that precinct. There are also witnesses that reported police presence in the area prior to the shooting, and the forensic issue here is, although Luke's movements through the precinct should be fully traceable and fixed via CCTV, like we spoke about earlier, large portions of footage have never been disclosed. We move into phase 2 of this timeline, and this is the critical missing period, and this is approximately a 30-minute window. Now, we don't have the exact times because we don't have the exact information. So the status of this is missing evidence. So we have the police provided timelines, which, again, they shouldn't have been doing. It should be an independent body here. But they contain an unexplained gap of approximately 30 minutes. Now, Luke's partner has provided a detailed account of their movements during this period. So the CCTV footage from inside a cafe, which could also corroborate or refute witness statements, was provided in a distorted, unwatchable condition with signs of tampering. And why this matters forensically? Because this period can establish whether Luke was observed, followed, or monitored, and whether the police interest predated the fatal encounter, and whether officers' statements about the no prior interaction are accurate. But most importantly, without this footage, motive, context, and officer conduct can't be assessed. Now, for phase 3 is Luke's final moments. Luke is obviously walking through the precinct at this time, and the status of this evidence is incomplete and altered evidence. So the witnesses state that they saw footage of Luke's final walk. That footage has never been produced. Some witnesses allege police requested venues delete footage. CCTV that was disclosed had the timestamps removed, and they can't be synchronised with the body-worn camera footage of police, and they weren't provided in the original file format. So the forensic standard is breached here. So original digital files with intact metadata are required for several reasons, being that they confirm the time, the sequence of events, and the movement. They also detect edits or compression artifacts, and they also establish a reliable timeline. So without any of this, like I've said, any reconstruction is just speculation at this point. So phase 4 of this timeline, I'm trying to make this as black and white for you as possible so I'm not overloading you with information, but I've called it the police encounter. This is 18 seconds, you guys. That's about how long it takes me to walk to my fridge and back. So the status of this is partially captured / disputed, okay, because we can't align anything. It's a downhill show from here. The police body-worn cameras capture part of this interaction. Fixed CCTV that should capture the officer approach, the relative positioning, the environmental context is all missing or edited. So obviously there's key forensic limitations here. We've got the body-worn camera footage not being able to stand alone. It has to be synchronized, okay? That's not accepted without being synchronized with fixed CCTV. This, again, it just confirms the distances, movements, times, whether Luke advanced, retreated. It's basically one person's point of view. That's why. None of that was ever done. Then we have phase 5, the use of lethal force. This is obviously when the shots were fired, and the status of this I've put as forensically unresolved because we have public accounts vary on the number of shots fired. There's obviously no complete ballistic reconstruction. We would need a bullet trajectory map, confirmed impact points, full projectile recovery, and the sequence of fire analysis. Don't have it. Why does this matter forensically? Because without the reconstruction, we don't have a timeline. The investigators can't determine which officer fired what shot, whether each shot was justified, whether lethal force ceased when the threat ceased. Did they shoot after they had fatally shot Luke? This is obviously a foundational failure in any police shooting investigation. Phase 6 is the immediate post-shooting response. So we're talking about obviously after all the shots have been fired, and this status is obviously disputed because Luke was handcuffed after being shot. First aid was not immediately rendered. CPR was delayed. And all of these actions were captured on police footage, but the family was denied permission to publicly release it despite consenting. The forensic relevance here is very obvious, but we have the post-incident conduct relevant to the duty of care, the medical survivability, and the officer mindset and training compliance, all very, very important. Now we have almost finally the autopsy and forensic phase 7. The status is procedurally compromised, which you probably know why by now. This Form 1 authorising a full autopsy was completed allegedly without family consent. If consent was falsely recorded, then the autopsy constitutes a legal and ethical breach. And then all downstream forensic findings from here are compromised. They're screwed. That's it. So this allegation was never investigated by oversight bodies or addressed in the coronial findings. We've got 2 phases left, so bear with me. Phase 8 is the inquest process, and this is, I have marked the status as procedurally unfair for obvious reasons, the key witnesses not being called. Some witness statements contradicted video evidence. There was no cross-examination. Experts were given edited footage only, not original CCTV or complete forensic data. There's, of course, portions of transcripts and audio that are alleged to be missing or altered. And forensic principles have been violated yet again because the expert opinion is only as reliable as the material it's based on. So then our final finding for the timeline is, our final phase, is finding. So I just got that backwards. The status is contested outcome. And I've put this for a number of reasons, because the findings were delivered without a hearing date. Police were cleared of wrongdoing. Luke's death was classified, this is the worst one, as victim precipitated homicide. And this conclusion relied on the incomplete evidence, the unchallenged testimony, expert opinions formed without all of the material and full disclosure. And a finding can't be reliable if the evidence base is incomplete or altered. That's just the fact. That's an absolute fact. So to conclude forensically, this timeline that I've just given you, quite brief, but I might do a visual for you. It demonstrates that the missing CCTV alone prevents a fair determination. Then, of course, the ballistic evidence was never properly tested. Digital evidence integrity was compromised. Procedural safeguards failed at multiple stages. Oversight mechanisms did not function independently. It just goes on and on. Like, it's unreal. And this is not even a question of my opinion. This is whether the minimum forensic standards required for truth finding were ever even met. Like, when the evidence is missing, we can't find the truth. Like, this is just the way it is. It's just a fact. And unfortunately, this is what we're dealing with here. This is why everybody should be outraged. Anybody could be in this situation. We need to help this family. We need to spread this story far and wide. I want to thank you so much for coming and listening to Justice for Luke Gilbert Part 2. There will be more parts to this. It takes a little bit of extra time than the typical podcast episodes that you get from us, because it takes a lot to make sure. Obviously, there's a lot of guidelines that they have to follow, some things that you can and can't say. You have to say allegedly every 5 seconds. Lots of things to consider. And there's obviously lots of injustices to consider under multiple categories, like we've just spoken about. Now, there were a couple of questions that I had to address, so I'll get into those before I love and leave you. The first question we have here is from Emily, and she said, "Hi, Asha, there are a lot of questions in Luke's case. Firstly, how can the coroner legally decide relevant information is irrelevant? And what legislation does the coroner have to adhere to when making these decisions?" These are both very fair and relevant. So we'll start from the start. So when we're talking about the coroner, they don't really necessarily decide what's relevant or irrelevant based on their personal opinion. Now, they are bound by legislation. So, for example, I will use WA because that's where I am. So in WA, we have the Coroner's Act of 1996, and this is just an act or a set of rules that will set out the scope of the whole inquest, the whole coronial inquest, and this is generally limited to just defining who the person was, who is the subject of the inquest, when and where that person died, and the medical cause of death and the manner of death. Now, that's what they should be basing everything over. Now, because of that limited legal scope, a coroner can exclude material they determine personally they don't think it directly assists in answering any of those specific questions, even if the information feels important or raises serious concerns for the family or us as the public. This can obviously include evidence relating to the broader accountability of the case or the systemic issues that we're talking about. Even misconduct if the coroner who is seeing the case considers those matters outside the statutory purpose of the inquest. I would love to think that they would take anything that is kind of known as misconduct or anything serious like that and make a suggestion. But that said, irrelevant, it doesn't mean unimportant, obviously. It simply means that that's the coroner's job and they've determined the material doesn't fall within the questions that they're given that they have to answer. And if concerns remain about matters excluded from an inquest, like we have here, they suggest typically to pursue them through other legal or oversight avenues like civil proceedings or independent review bodies such as the CCC and lots of, different independent bodies that they have reached out to, and it's typically up to them and they've decided to do nothing with it. I hope that helps clarify how these decisions are made, even if it doesn't. I know it makes sense to understand that, but it doesn't make sense to understand it at the deep level because they should be there more so as a judge rather than just answering those couple of questions, it feels like, in this situation. So, yeah, I completely understand where those questions come from, and thank you for sending them. I have another question here from Jane, and she said, I have many questions, but one in particular in regards to Constable Bryce Collins and what involvement exactly did he have in Luke's story/case, please? So what can be said publicly and responsibly, I guess, is that Constable Bryce Collins was actually one of the officers present at the incident involving Luke. His involvement is referenced in official records and reporting in relation to the police response at the scene. It's very important to be careful and accurate in answering that. I'm happy to have a bit of a chat with you if you want me to go on and further about that. If you type in his name on Google, you'll be able to see a bit more. But if you want me to have a chat with you, I can. But thank you for that question as well. I think I will leave it there so we don't go too far over time and we can maybe pop a couple of other questions in our next part for Luke, because there's always a lot of discussion around that. And I also am very appreciative of people on my page who have been supportive of Luke and his family and this case and story and have jumped over to the Justice for Luke page as well. If you haven't already, please make sure you do that and you can keep up to date with everything that's going on about the book, of course, that you can purchase on Amazon. You can find a little bit of information about that on our website. You can obviously jump over to Justice for Luke to find a bit more information about that, but you can also search Shot Dead on Amazon and you'll be able to buy that book. I couldn't recommend it enough. I get absolutely nothing for telling you to go and buy this book. I'm literally telling you for the sake of your knowledge about civics and systemic injustices in this country, and a very real and raw story. The way it's written by Nicola it's incredibly easy to read. I have written a little bit in the start of the book for them as their it's not introduction, I've forgotten the word, it's left my brain. But I did mention in there again that it is a testament to the loving and beautiful, strong relationship that Luke's parents have together, both in loving and raising Luke, but also in grieving Luke, and how they've stuck together tighter than ever through this, which is sadly not something that happens often. It's not something that we see with a lot of families. There's always a lot of divide in this family. You can tell raised Luke and his two siblings in the most loving and respectful home, and it's just incredibly sad. It'll never not be shocking to me. I lose words often when I talk about it. I recommend the book so much. Even if you've read it, maybe grab a copy as a gift for somebody that you know. And other ways to help, obviously, are just keeping up to date, sharing things, talking about them. You might think that these sorts of things don't help, but you never know whose eyes are going to fall upon the names and the words that you're sharing, and it's really important. But I appreciate you all so much. Thank you so much for being here. Let us know if you have any other questions or things that you want to hear more about to do with Luke and his case. And yeah, thank you again for being here. Love you all. Have a beautiful day.